experience right now in the world of artificial intelligence is helping businesses that are employing it either internally within their business or externally if they're customer facing, or trying to do something in a nonprofit way throughout the world. So a lot of my focus has been spent on topics such as human trafficking, policing, criminal investigations, how artificial intelligence fits into that, as well as temporary job placement, and some other areas of that space. So I will pass it to Philip.
Thanks. And so I'm Phil Baudouin, if you speak French. I'm from Montreal, and work at Element AI. I'm one of the co-founders there. And to give you a brief overview of what Element AI does, we are a product company that focuses on building products based on artificial intelligence. And more specifically, we use one of the latest advances in AI called deep learning, or machine learning if you want, where the goal is to use data to teach a computer to do some tasks, right? Rather than using strict rules as we used to do when we were doing traditional programming, we show a lot of data to the computer and it learns to do some tasks. So we're basically in the business of developing products that rely on this technique to automate some of the tasks in different industries. The industries we are working in are we're in insurance, we're in the financial sector, but we're also in retail, manufacturing, we work with pharmaceuticals, so there's a lot of
BMG on Phil Nicholson's hat. We're an accounting and advisory firm, so we do audit and tax. I am on the consulting side, and I help companies. We're going through major changes. Think about the people side of it. What's the impact? How do you take people along? How do you make sure they're ready and a part of that journey? And obviously, in the last few years, AI has been a huge part of that, and kind of thinking through how do you move beyond the fear, and how do you make AI something that makes that work experience actually better for people, and there's a ton of opportunity. There is always risk and challenges, and how do we mitigate those risks? So rather than thinking about the actual design and building it, I'm always kind of that counterbalance of, well, how do we make sure it's what people need and creating the experience that they seek.
That's terrific, Michelle. I think the implementation of AI is so critical for, I think, its success. Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Holzberger. I work for Nuance Healthcare. We are a leader in AI, both in speech technology, speech to text. So if you know Siri from Apple, one of the leaders there, think about how Alexa is used for speech to text when you're talking to the virtual assistant in your home. I'm on the healthcare side, so we use AI technologies as well as applications for the doctors to be more efficient, use them as backstop programs to help with the quality so they can get back to doing what they love to do, is taking care of patients. One of the epic problems that we're facing in healthcare today is that the doctors are burning out. I mean, they spend so much time doing documentation, and I'm sure we're all patients. And how much time does a doctor actually spend with us, and they're not in front of their computer every day and every time that they have an appointment with you, because they're trying to document everything. And so we build technologies and tools to help get them back to what they love, and that's actually taking care of all of us as patients. Thanks for having us.
Great. All right, excellent. So, you know, everybody has a different relationship with the term AI, and so it would be great to just do a quick, before we kind of get into the guts of the empathy portion, we're going to just do a quick level set on what artificial intelligence is. So when you guys are dealing with artificial intelligence on a practical daily basis, how are you describing it to those who might be unfamiliar? And how are you trying to, you know, maybe have them have a picture of what reality and a real implementation of, you know, an example of how it might apply to them in a real world capacity?
Yeah, I can start with this one. Yeah, so AI, if you try to define it in an abstract way, it's always a bit messy. It gets tricky because it's been around for so long, and the definition of it has kind of evolved too in time, or what has been considered AI or not has kind of changed. But it's interesting, I think, to look at what the kind of tools we are using today that rely on AI. And it's easy to see the extremes, right? It's easy to see like Siri and Alexa respond when we talk to them as AI, but it's more subtle than that. And I'd like to point out maybe one example of a place where you would find AI and you might not actually know that the technology behind that is the same as other AI systems. And my example is something as simple as autocomplete on your phone. I don't know if you've already used that, but once you start typing something on a phone, it completes automatically. And this seems like, oh, it's just a software feature that has existed since forever, but the current iteration of that software feature is definitely based on AI technologies. It's been looking at the way hundreds of people have completed their sentences in the past, and it has trained itself from that to be able to complete the sentence you're typing and reduce the number of keystrokes you have to do, right? So that's just a very subtle example, but behind that is the same technology that we find everywhere in AI today. And I'm sure others will have other examples like that, but wanted to point this one out.
Yeah, I think for me, when I'm dealing with leaders in companies, they struggle a little bit of how they would apply it in their own organization, but then when you think about your personal life and outside, it becomes much clearer of, oh, all these things that make life a little bit easier and better, and just simple things like ways, you know, that being able to, oh, what is the best route, you know, how is traffic, so kind of bringing all of that information to give you better information or guidance, or even kind of predicting another way or a different way to do things. And I think our brains, and for those of you who spend a lot of time with data in Excel, it's a nightmare to try and bring it all together and get those insights and bring it so I can make a good and thoughtful and informed decision. And so when I can give people experiences and insights of how that's happening in their personal life, because we are seeing AI there probably first and foremost, then they start to come up with ideas of how that could work in their organization or the workplace on a day-to-day basis.
That's terrific. I think for our industry in healthcare, it's about how do you help the doctors get information. You know, patients are sicker, they're coming in with more chronic diseases, more complicated diseases, and to get at that information, I mean, for the past 10 years, we've been, you know, collecting what was paper-based records now into electronic format, and doctors, now that this data has been collected, whether your patient record, it's your lab results, whether it's your imaging results, all these things as you are as a patient, you've got to put that in a way and collect it so the doctor can make better decisions, and better decisions, earlier decisions about your health. And that's really important to them. And so we talk about these more quality-based programs or patient outcomes to help them make better and more informed decisions, because the data today is locked away. And this is where machine learning tools that analyze this data, while they're, you know, again, being custodians of the privacy pieces of this, of your patient data, but to help them make better decisions, you know, more quickly, so they can treat cancer at late stage 1 versus picking it up 2 years later, and next thing you know, you're late stage 3. And those types of things that have an impact of how they practice and how it impacts the patient population that they're helping.
One of the things, if we had kind of the next slide that was coming up, is that we, in our space, and as well as some of the specific domains as well, a lot of people don't understand how much AI can be used throughout so much. And because artificial intelligence is able to make its way into every facet of our lives, every facet of our jobs, and in small little ways that can eventually ramp up. Things like scheduling a meeting for myself. And then you take it to the next level and say, well, wait a minute, do we even need this meeting? And then, wait a minute, who are the people that are absolutely necessary for this meeting? And even artificial intelligence will be able to say, you know what, you don't need this meeting. I can actually get this information from multiple people, and we can just kind of come to a consensus separately. And when you think of artificial intelligence as an assistant, as an aid to yourself, to reduce some of the things, then where does it go from there? Where do we go as humans that have been tasked with a lot of automated experiences and having to do things in a very mechanical fashion throughout a lot of our jobs? You brought up Excel, for example. How much do we all want to be spending our time in Excel? Are we hardwired for that? Or are we hardwired for human connection? Are we fighting biology in our current job situation? So one of the first portions of empathy to kind of dig into is, I think that as humans, how much of our lives are spent doing things that we're just not built to do, and how much is artificial intelligence able to, within your spaces, help to reduce some of that mechanical actions as humans and move us into something that we can be interacting human to human a lot more. If you'd like to start.
Sure, and I think you have to talk about the whole soul sucking of some of this stuff, because I think that's such an important comment. I think just from the perspective of healthcare, you think of a doctor goes to school for 10 years and then goes into practice. But healthcare and just the innovation that has happened and the advancements that we've made in cancer and those types of diseases, diabetes, Alzheimer's, all that is coming out because of the research that we're doing. AI is now helping these doctors, again, make better decisions because the latest and greatest of information can get in front of them. And to your point, it's about you've got to maintain the interaction of the user of AI, whatever your specialty is, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the automotive industry for safety, whether it's the financial industry with cybercrime, all those pieces. It's the interaction of the two together. So you can augment whatever that industry needs to be augmented for safety reasons, for healthcare reasons, for whatever that is, and not coming in only thinking about, well, I'm going to drive out all this efficiency, because efficiency then leads to replacement, and I think that's where the fear comes in, and that's where you lose empathy. But I think Michelle, to your point, when we start planning for this, is that there are things that we can get rid of, to your point.
Yeah, I've talked about this a lot. I think when you look at your day-to-day and what frustrates you, it's all these administrative, annoying tasks where you're like, is this really adding any value to anyone? But I gotta get it done. Just little things, doing your expenses, just paperwork, filling things out where you're like, I've already done this somewhere else exactly the same way. Like in healthcare, and those forms every time. I was just in the doctor and I'm like, right, why am I saying this again? Yeah. And I think that is the huge opportunity. And I know there's a lot of fear out there around full jobs going away, and we're not seeing that. It's this kind of stuff, the partial jobs, the things that people don't really want to be doing, and it's those things that are taking people away from the things they do want to do, away from the human interaction, being able to collaborate, come up with ideas. Maybe meetings don't need to go away, but they're focused on other things, not all of these just really tactical types of things. And I think one example that we as KPMG had helped one organization with, the HR function in this healthcare organization, they spent so much of their time going and looking on state websites to confirm that practitioners' licenses were up to date. And so literally just, what's the license number, putting it into the website, okay, nope, here's where they're at. And just, can you imagine doing that hour after hour after hour? You're like, I'm an HR person, I'm supposed to be helping people, finding the right people, coaching them in their job, giving them good career opportunities, and this is what I'm doing. So being able to pull back those activities, I think, should allow us to be more empathetic and spend time on human connections. At least that's my
Well, and Lance, you said it before, you know, it was about we're wired this way to have interaction. And so how does AI help us be able to interact with humans again and not be so disconnected that way? I think that's a really great point that you made before.
Well, and Philip, you were bringing up earlier on in our kind of conversation is that, you know, we as a society are really structured around a lot of the mechanical actions of our day. I got to drive here, I got to do this, we have task lists everywhere. And our jobs as well are wired around task lists. And I've got to do this, and we haven't necessarily rewarded. Oftentimes, I'd like to go and hang out with a friend of mine and have coffee. But no, my task list has taken over, I've got to do my task list. If AI is helping me with my task list and helping businesses with their task list, are we even societally structured to shift to a more empathy-based interaction, or are we not going to know what to do with our time? And where does that go?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question to ask, right? If you only look at the title of this panel, it's Empathy in the World of Artificial Intelligence. It almost feels like we want to talk about whether AI can be empathic or not, but if we go back to it, this really is a human trait. This is really what drives a lot of us, what makes life worthwhile to an extent. It's these human connections. It's our ability to relate to one another. But at the same time, when we say we're afraid of AI taking our jobs, we're never talking about we're afraid of AI stealing my friend, right? Or we're afraid of AI being a more empathetic system than I am as a human. We're afraid of AI stealing our tasks. And this is interesting. It actually hints to the fact that we define ourselves very much as task-accomplishing devices, which is weird, which is like, really, is this what we want life to be about? Is this how we want to structure society? So when you start thinking about these little tasks that you do, first of all, let me reassure you, the current state of AI today is not going to automate all of your tasks. Your task list is not going away. We can do some of them, and a lot of them you still have to do yourself, you know, and they're still boring. But there are some tasks that we will automate, which means that we will free time for people. What do we do with that? Do we just find more tasks to do, or do we try to go back to the human connection? That is what we actually, I think, what we want to do more of. But then, as you say, how do we as a society start to accept the fact that connecting to other humans is something that brings value? Like, I like the example from healthcare, because right now if you ask doctors, they will say, well, what brings value is not the 15 minutes I spend reassuring, like most doctors, right? The 15 minutes I spend reassuring a patient, it's like all the tasks that I've accomplished that maybe saved that patient's life. But the truth is, these 15 minutes are incredibly important, and they can change the patient's life more patients. So, but as a society, do we actually reward that? You know, even doctors look at their work and look at the time they spend doing that and find that that should be their job? It's a good question, and I think what AI will force us to do is to revisit our definition of what it means to bring value to society. I think more of that around.
A lot of headlines right now, you may see, artificial intelligence may be taking our jobs away. And I think a prominent conversation right now is that, the Industrial Revolution and technology has displaced jobs. What we used to do manually, we don't have to do manually anymore. And it's been a slow progression for the last, 200 years. But, you may see in the headlines a lot of, well, artificial intelligence is something that may be a little bit more quick we may be displacing people at a much higher rate than what we've been used to, what we've been accustomed to at this point. And what do we do? Do we have to retrain those people? Do we have to? Artificial intelligence, while it may quickly come and displace, perhaps, at a much faster rate, can artificial intelligence also help to get those people trained? Can it help to form new new interactions? One of the things that we talked about earlier is, and Michelle, maybe you can start off with this one, is the idea that it may increase in a financial capacity the amount of auditing that happens, but it can also help those auditors to do more with their time, and also to be able to check, to do both sides of things. What do you think about, if it does displace, what it can also help to enable?
Yeah, and it's funny because people talk about displacement a lot, but you look at the need for employees in certain times of work, and companies can't meet the demand that they've got. So I think the displacement goes back to this fear of the tasks and what's changing, and you look at, and we see it in mining, for example, people going out and doing the truck work, and no one wants to do it. So they're figuring out, like, well, how do I automate it? Because someone would rather sit, and make it more like a video game where they're not having to go out into a remote place. And so and audit's a great one. Our office managing partner is here, who is an auditor and has grown up doing that kind of work. And people coming up in the workforce now want different things, and they want different experiences. So I don't think the concept of displacement is as extreme as, sure, it's going to happen, but that's been happening in society forever. And I think instead it's more this opportunity to give people the things that they wanted to do, rather than getting forced into these they think they're going to do something in their career, but you spend all your time just sorting through Excel sheets and trying to match them up and get the data right, and then you go home at night. So when you think about really being able to influence, if you're an auditor, being able to influence how this company is going about it, identifying issues, giving them guidance. We know that there are issues with audit, and there's always the potential for human error. Having automation that can do those double, triple checks, identify things that from a human standpoint maybe didn't even conceive as possible, or you haven't seen yet in your career but came from something else. I just think the opportunity when you're dealing with other people, and rather than being stuck in data, and we talked about data, and it's like, instead of us being stuck and trying to put all the data together and figure out what is the right data, we now have the opportunity to come together and talk about, what does that data mean? What decisions are we going to make? What do you think about it? How is that going to impact us? And that's the time people will spend from a career standpoint. And so it's not differently that, quite honestly, I think everyone is craving and they want.
Right, and absolutely, and I think it's this evolution of just this, to your point, of shifting of what jobs are not being filled today and what jobs need to be filled, and then how AI can access the data, get insights to the data, answers to actually get somebody new in their career, more proficient in whatever that it is, whether it's a doctor, whether it's an auditor, whether it's an airline pilot. If you think about it, take a step back, think about what's flying a plane today for the most part. It's AI tools, and it's been doing it for 20 years. But it's that you have to have the interaction of the pilot and the co-pilot there too. And so again, it's this interaction. I think the other piece that's really important to think about in this interaction and being empathy is, to your point, around we can't always rely on just the data in front of us. You just talked about, and so did you, Lance, in an article about how AI helped HR in making hiring decisions, but all the historical data of hiring decisions was what? All white men. Okay,
So they looked at historically who had been successful in the organization.
and guess what? You know, maybe that's not the answer before, but then you have this data, give insight of a human who's got experience in there to make yet a better decision. So in the healthcare industry, we talk about this being feedback loops by the doctor, but it applies anywhere. To your point in auditing, being an auditor, a tax auditor, financial auditor, in any type of industry. That goes back to this interaction, and that's where you get empathy in AI and start dealing with the bias problem.
Yeah.
Am I going to go bias now?
I had a question because, especially from the training perspective, you spend a lot of time, Philip, in the training, the building out of models, the thoughts. And bias is a big thing right now. And when you look at, especially recently, there are several articles out there on bias, and from a kind of a practical level-setting standpoint, it's to say that we as a society have bias. We as individuals have bias. That's a guaranteed thing across the system. And when an AI is augmenting what we already do, the practices and the procedures that we already do, then it can further enforce. So the question is, do you have to introduce bias to counter bias? And to bias against bias. And so recently there have been reports on mortgage applications, for example, and those certainly taking historical data on who has been able to get mortgages have really focused on a demographic that do we want to enforce that same pattern by training the models to be able to be preferential to those who have historically been able to get mortgages, or are we going to need to really focus as a society to retrain artificial intelligence to try to counter what the natural history of training would have gone, to be able to allow mortgages to be easier to spread out fairly across all of society and not just one person. So Philip, since you spent a lot of time in the training of things, what are your thoughts on the algorithms and how we can fight against the natural bias of the training data that exists?
So that's a really interesting and important question. We hear AI in a bunch of different ways, right? We hear about, it goes back to our fears of the Terminator, but the real things we should fear today, I think, are around this question of bias. So I'd like first to unpack that question from the technical angle, the technical challenges of building algorithms that use data to try to make decisions, and also what I would call the social angle of defining fairness as a society. What does it mean to be fair or to be biased? And I think this is actually asking the question in a much more pressing way than before, because we're engineering tools that rely on our social agreement on what fairness and bias is. Because let's be honest here, making a decision is being biased. We have to be biased. For example, you decide to hire someone or not hire someone. You're biasing your decision on something. Maybe you're biasing it on your questionnaire and how well they did in the interview, and then you're like, okay, I think that person is going to do a better job in the future than that other person. This is a bias. You're using bias to do that. It's not necessarily a non-desirable bias. You're not necessarily biasing against, say, black people or white people or female and male, but you are biasing according to some criteria. What if that criteria correlates with some undesirable bias? For example, if your questionnaire is made in a way that white males succeed more than females at it, right? You will end up with some statistical bias after the hiring. Right? And this is a question we have to ask ourselves. Is, from a social angle, is that fair? Do we actually want to look at the statistics and say, if your questionnaire is not offering equal chances to everybody, you should change your questionnaire, right? And this is a question we have to ask ourselves. I think if you just go about it, it's going to be, you're going to have a poll with people on different sites, right? So the technical angle, though, is also very important. Because there's a tendency, we've had a tendency with technology to believe that once you throw a technical solution at a problem, then you're golden. You know, if the technical solution is being well programmed, well engineered, it's going to do the work correctly. But for AI and machine learning based solution, the solution is only as good as the data that was used to train it. And if that data contains some biases, these biases are going to be reflected in the decision the system has made. And if we're not careful about that, there are a lot of dangers, right? First of all, we might recreate the biases of the past, but it can be even worse than that, because if we use that system to make decisions, we might be generating new data set that is even more biased than the previous one, and we get into that bad loop of just recreating biases in the past. And from a technical angle, figuring out what is biased or not is really hard. For example, you might imagine that if you remove the race column from your Excel spreadsheet, you cannot be biased against race. This is obviously not true, right? Because if you have the income column and the income correlates with the race in some way, shape, or form, then your system can pick up on that and reintroduce the biases anyway. So very difficult questions. We need tools to look at the systems to assess if these biases exist or not, and then we need a social consensus to define what fairness is and to make sure that these systems convey the right kind of fairness that we want.
Is this a governmental problem? Is it a practitioner problem when it comes to the training and the implementation?
Definitely both, right? So I think society, governments have to put guidelines. Actually, the European Commission, the European Union has a commission on the ethics of AI, and they just put out a framework that includes some very interesting guidelines around measuring biases and assessing biases and trying to understand fairness. But then from a practitioner perspective, the practitioner needs the tools to open up their system and figure out if the system has these undesirable biases or not.
I'd just add that with AI, we actually can audit and go and find those. When it's not in data, right, when you just know it's out there happening and people are just doing it, it's significantly harder to monitor, to correct, to call out. So as much as there's the risk of bias, there's the opportunity to actually identify now and do something about it.
Right, you have an opportunity to actually make the bias the baseline and then change the baseline. I think that's really important on the practitioner pieces of this. And I think where the government comes in, specifically in healthcare with the role of the FDA, is, okay, here's your set of guidelines around this, but we expect you as the practitioner, the doctor, to continue to give us feedback about how AI is working, so then we can improve that bias one way or another. It's really important. It goes back to this, again, interaction between the two, because you're right, our AI starts with the quality of the data. We've been collecting data in healthcare for, at least when you think about radiology, so you think about the CT images, your ultrasound, X-ray, when you go and have a cough and your doctor thinks you have pneumonia. We've been collecting these digital images for 20 years. But if the annotated data of how the doctor diagnosed them aren't there, that's where your bias is, and that's why feedback loops, that interaction, and being able to take a baseline, move the baseline, so you get a tighter control of that, I think is really important. And I think that's also in the financial industry. I mean, hey, look, AI is going to be used for good, and AI is going to be used for bad. I mean, you think about, we're talking about the fraudsters out there, but AI being able to, through biometrics and those types of security pieces, can actually combat into the financial industry too. And again, each side of it, the human interaction has got to be able to kind of change again that data set to continue to improve it.
If on this subject of as we're talking about empathy and we're trying to define empathy and define artificial intelligence. One other tact to this is artificial intelligence. We see it in the movies a lot, right? We see these robots, you know, pretending to be humans.
Right, the Jetsons.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of our primary connections, or it's the opposite. It's the Terminator coming to attack us, and a very unempathetic realization of this. I think of it. I go back to calling the call center, right? Calling customer support on my internet service. Right? I can get somebody who is extremely unempathetic, or I can get somebody who is extremely empathetic. And it depends on the person, how they're wired, how they're programmed, how much they hate their jobs, how much they enjoy trying to solve your problems for you. So when we talk about artificial intelligence maybe helping people to have more of a human-to-human connection, is that a good thing? Is it also something, one of the other questions is how can artificial intelligence help monitor the human-to-human connection or however whatever's going on to be able to help and teach humans to be more empathetic with each other? And I think of it based off of that concept of audit, as we were talking about, where can it be listening, can it be observing, and do we even want that? Do we want artificial intelligence listening to us, helping to coach us, helping us be better humans as well? I'll kind of leave it out to anybody who has a thought.
I'll pick up on this one because I like it. So, do we want that, right? Do we want another mother looking like over our shoulder and saying, "Hey, that wasn't correct"? Yes. No, but let me tell you why okay, so I'll bring up something that we did at Element AI roughly a year ago. We worked with Amnesty International on a project called Troll Patrol. And the idea there was Amnesty wanted to shine the light on, we've used social media, we know social media, and we know that not everybody is super empathetic there, right? And so Amnesty wanted to shine the light specifically on Twitter and show that there was a lot of harassment, a lot of abuse going on there. So they picked 800 women politicians, journalists, and they basically tried to analyze how many harassment or abuse tweets they were receiving. And if you try to do that manually, I don't know, but talk about the boring and actually scaring and traumatizing task for a human to do. So what we did instead is we trained an AI, which would kind of be like an audit or monitoring AI if you want, to look at the tweets these women received over a year and to try to figure out how many of them were harassment or abuse tweets. So we had some humans look at the very small sample of tweets and tagged the one that were harassments or neutral or somewhere in the gray zone. But from that, we were able to train an AI that was able to look at the entire all the tweets that these women received, and it found out that roughly 7% of the tweets they received over a year were harassment or problematic tweets, which is pretty big. It's like it amounted for these 800 women to something like 1.1 million tweets over a year. So that's a lot. But it's also very interesting. Like you can see that as a monitoring tool, but what if we actually started using that as a nudging tool or as a way to try to design, maybe we filter these out, or we allow women to filter these out automatically using an AI. And then suddenly, these trolls don't have as much traction as they used to, maybe, right? And suddenly, maybe we end up with a cleaner social space online. I don't know, but I personally feel that we desperately need tools like that. And here I'm only talking about the harassment parts and the bullying part, cyberbullying, all of that. But what if it could actually help us have more human conversation around the increasing divide that we see online? Right? We see extreme positions being taken more and more every day, and less people building bridges between these extremes. Basically, I call that echo chambers. We see that happening more and more. So clearly, technology here is not helping us solve our problems. It's not helping us communicate better together. I really hope that AI can help us, in some sense, try to bridge these gaps and find people on both sides who are willing to talk to one another and maybe find some common grounds. So that I think it's one of the key to starting solving the real problems we face every day. So that's why I think we need a bit more of that.
Yeah, one of the examples that we work with is around human trafficking and trying to bring in AI into a space that we don't typically think about, which is we try and cut out the whole structure of. Think about the fact that there are buyers out there who are looking for, looking for prostitutes and looking for underage. They need counseling, they need help, they need to be kind of taken out of the market, if you will, as well. And how can artificial intelligence help to actually bridge that, to be able to set that person up with counseling, and to be able to say, there's a different way for you to be acting, there's a different lifestyle that you can embrace right now, and how can AI identify those who are engaging right now and interrupt the conversation. So it's something that it's hard for a human to be able to enter into that space. But does this help to increase an empathetic system overall, rather than further creating the divide that could happen there? Are there any other thoughts that especially in the space right now, political space and others, where does AI reinforce our tendency to echo chamber and to huddle up? And is it going to just feed us what we already want to have fed to us? Or can we introduce something into AI that can help to facilitate connection and facilitate conversation?
I can give you a healthcare example outside of the clinician space. Think about the opioid crisis that's happening today. That's all getting documented in prescriptions, emergency room visits, and all that. As folks are going in to get drugs to be able to handle pain. That's all documented. But it's impossible if you go to an ER emergency room at hospital A, so I've got pain, and you get the prescription for this, and then 2 weeks later you're going to hospital B to do the same thing, and then you're going back to your regular doctor. That AI can now make those interconnections through the documentation to be able to have that patient go down a different path of not drug abuse. And you think about just how debilitating that is, not to just the person, but the family around those interactions and that type of thing. And I think that's where also AI for good, to change the dynamic around having a patient be able to get the right type of help, whether it's drug addiction planning and all those types of things there. I think it's a very important different aspect, similar to yours about human trafficking. Certainly not the same level, but how you can redirect a course of wellness or safety, that type of thing. And that's, you can't, it's a pandemic problem with the opioid crisis today.
While we're talking about that, you brought up looking at the data, having artificial intelligence being able to look at health data and health records. There is a fear, especially Alexa listening in on us, right? Alexa listening in on my healthcare records. What are we doing, and what do we need to do around artificial intelligence and privacy and our private data, and locking it out or making it accessible? In the case of the opioid situation, does that person want to, or is it best for that person to have that happen? It's a challenging topic, but what are your views on privacy of data and what artificial intelligence does with that?
So there's a couple ways to think about this, and I'll talk about the patient interaction, but also around just AI to drive better information for doctors to make better decisions overall around a disease state or health, whether it's Alzheimer's, diabetes, cancer, more, qualitative data that you have around the patient population. You can start making better decisions. The hospitals have had to really grapple with this idea of PHI, or private health information. How do you keep your data secure, especially now as all this data is being, your patient data is being collected electronically. They've had to deal with those pieces for a long time. They've done a very good job of being, quote unquote, the custodians of that data. And if it's used, you give permission, or wait, how do you think about this? Or it's anonymized. And so you look at, again, a population across a state or a region, or a population of this type of, again, disease state. Like, let's look at Alzheimer's. In the case of a patient who is abusing drugs, I think it's very important for that relationship between the patient and the doctor, who has that authority to understand your entire patient jacket. And so if you're going back to your PCP or your primary care physician, you've built that relationship, you're documenting those pieces, and your doctor hasn't had this way up until now to be able to understand the whole patient record, your whole health, to be able to do something like that. And I think that's really, really important. I think difference between the one-on-one relationship that you have with a doctor versus trying to do betterment of a population of people around, curing cancer, curing Alzheimer's, and all that piece, where they do anonymization of that patient data and look at trends across, hundreds of thousands of records.
So I'm just kind of thinking about the healthcare example, and we always talk about like AI as if someone else, this other thing, is doing this to us.
It goes in the background.
and I think we have to remind ourselves, like, this is us making decisions about how it's going to work and how it's going to interact with us. And when you look at, if you look at examples that are out there today that we're all using, they were designed for us. We're using them because they met the need for us in the way that we wanted. And I think we've got to remember that's what's going to happen in all these places where there's questions and unknowns. It's still going to be designed for us to meet our needs in the way we want it. And there'll be some rocky places where it's like, no, that wasn't really, and we'll learn as we go. But I think it's always important to keep that in mind. And I know we've had some good conversations about it looked at us as people, and it was empathetic and said, what's your challenge, what's your need, how do we make your life better?
That's so important as you talk about this, the implementation of it. What you focus on all the time when you go into the consulting engagements, because it can go wrong if you don't think about the interaction. Where's the benefit to the user of the AI? Phil, you're going to say something?
No, I mean, exactly what you were saying there. I mean, I think artificial intelligence might be making it even more important to be human-centric when we think about designing solutions, tools, whatever, right, software, because this tool can be very, very powerful. So if we don't think of the human first, then we might end up in a place we don't want to be. But just like specifically about privacy, there's one thing I want to point out here that I just like try to do my little prediction here. I think there's a word or a concept you will hear a lot more of in the near future, and the concept is data governance, right? It's this idea that data becomes an asset that needs to be well managed, and we need governance structures, sound governance structures around that. And we've been kind of used to what I would almost call cowboy data governance, where the data we generate is being held by the service providers themselves. We generate data for Facebook. It's held by Facebook, and Facebook is using it to give us our Facebook feed. We generate data for Amazon. Amazon has it and uses it to increase our experience. There is no reason for that except historical. That's how it grew. But I think the concept we will need to think about a lot more in the future, and again, it's part of these European Commission guidelines, is sound data governance, and in particular, disconnecting the data itself from the service providers, and actually making the users themselves, the generator of the data. You and I provide this data when we write a blog post, when we post a picture on Instagram, or even today when we walk on the street and get captured by the cameras that look at us because they want to improve the experience through a smart city. Well, the end result that we want to get to might be novel, but if this data is in the hand of Google, because Google is building a smart city, which is the case, by the way, in Toronto with a project called Sidewalk Labs, well, if we suddenly give them access to all the data that they will capture in the city, we're going pretty down on that slippery slope. So we have to think back. It's I think, less about privacy and more about empowering the providers of the data with what they want to do with this data. If I want my data to be used to improve transit, to reduce the carbon footprint of my transit, maybe I want my data to be used for that. Well, I should have the right to say, this data here that I generated, give it to that company because I believe that company is actually helping transit. And this is what good data governance can do and will eventually do in the future. So this is the concept we probably all have as data generator, as citizen, to become acquainted with.
I would like to say, though, that data governance and artificial intelligence in general feel pretty abstract. How many of you would know where to go to mess with your artificial intelligence? To access the data, to tweak it, to challenge it, to even be able to say, I want some oversight on this. Where would you go? Where would you go for that? It feels
the
like
settings menu is all.
It's all settings. Yep. And if we don't know as citizens, and it's even more abstract than a device. Like, this is at least something I can hold in my hand and I know, oh, there's data on here. Now there's a cloud, and now there's artificial intelligence somewhere running amok or not running amok, whatever it is. What kind of tools, where do we need to go to be able to provide accessibility to the populace, I guess, around artificial intelligence? And not only that, the biggest question that technology has brought, especially where we're at right now in our society, is that we have a pretty significant wealth gap. And those who have capitalized on technology to be able to increase their own wealth gap. And what is, as far as upward mobility, is AI going to be a tool that the elites have to be able to kind of keep going? Or are we going, as a democracy and as citizens, are we going to be able to have access to the tools of AI?
So I'll start, but I think the data questions and do some of the basic and expensive. And so you look at like big companies today that didn't exist 5 years ago. I mean, a lot of it's because of what they've been able to do with AI. They don't have as many employees, they're able to get things done, but it does all come back to data. And I think there was a point around, if only a few organizations own all of that data, that is the kind of the new water or the new monetary, then it is going to be disparate. It is going to be hard, and so I think it will have to come back to data. The technology aspect itself is there for everyone to use. It's the data that everyone's got to be able to access to make it equal.
Right, I think that's why it goes back to the data governance, and certainly the Europeans have done a much better job than here we have in the U.S. around privacy, the right to be forgotten, who owns, how you get back in control of your data. And I think the U.S. needs to take a little bit of an eye and say we need to do the same thing. Because I agree with you, it's about all this massive amounts of data that we collect of all sorts. And then how is it used? Used for good, used for not good, for that.
Or you've got the monopoly problem, right? one company who owns it all and controls every aspect of our life because they have all our data.
Now we're getting to the fear of AI, not the empathy of AI. And I think there's still a ton of hope, you know.
And about AI, you know, increasing the wealth gap, or you know, like making upward mobility worse. I think this is the right time to remember that technology, and AI in particular itself, is neutral. Right? It doesn't care about it. It's just going to do what we want it to do. It's, you know, you can build face recognition system to help a patient get better care faster. I'm sure you can do that. You can also use face recognition system to train a drone and go kill someone. AI itself is neutral. It's up to us. It's up to what we want. But AI is fast. It's technology that goes really fast. So if we are socially in a dynamic that increases wealth, the wealth gap, I think it's just going to make that faster. Right? I think it's just going to make it, if we really care about solving that issue, it makes it more pressing for us to figure out what we're doing wrong. How do we start to change some aspects of our society so that we don't get into that increasing wealth gap? Because right now, let's just talk about education. Education is clearly a way through which the wealth gap increases if it's not distributed equally on both sides, right? Well, with AI, if you don't improve education, you will have some people who will understand really well how data governance works, and data trust, and all the fancy things that go on there, and they know exactly where to go in order to solve that. And these people will probably be the ones who have access to education, and if the dynamics are wrong, these are going to be the wealthy, and they will get wealthier through that. And that might happen faster because the technology is not going to slow down. So this is a real question we have to ask ourselves. Are we set up correctly as a society to try to bridge that gap? And if we're not, I think AI might risk speeding this up.
Is there the ability for those that have less access to technology, you know, historically, or are in lower income to be able to actually get into this whole space of artificial intelligence and facilitate that?
Well, we've got a very different dynamic around access now. You know, because of the cloud, because of mobile technology, I mean, we're all walking around with our iPhones. You think about, I'll give you an example about access to care. You know, you talk about the wealth gap, but talk about the access to basic health care for, you know, pregnant women in Africa. We don't have doctors there. We don't even have nurse practitioners there. And this is where access via AI and tools of just to help get care there is going to start bringing that part of our human society in a better place. You know, and that will start giving opportunity about healthier children coming. You know, you just think about there are basic things around how you do it being 20 weeks pregnant, and then how healthy is that baby, and getting answers about, okay, what basic vitamins do you need in that. That's going to help start to shrink, maybe not specifically wealth, but you start with, I think, basic human needs around right and access to health care, right and health, to your point about education, and those things that start limiting I would talk about the downward mobility of what we see today in our societies. And I think that's another place for good, is just around access to health care of people who can't get access today.
Building off of that, this is a good segue to kind of our final topic before we open it up to questions and answers from the group. But one of the, you know, taking that, kind of looking ahead toward the future, what does, in 2030, 10 years from now, what does, how does artificial intelligence help those humans, A, be more connected, to be able to allow for more empathy, or like what kind of lifestyle will people have when they're interacting with well, what kind of life does artificial intelligence make available?
Like I said, I have a lot of hope over the next 10 years around AI and it's doing good in all aspects of our lives. I really do. And I think probably because I've been in healthcare for 15 years and seeing doctors wanting to get back to what they do and the burnout that they have about just documentation, what our U.S. government has done around, but you have to document to get reimbursed, to get a patient to be able to get the next test and all this complications that happen, that they can get back to. That makes me very hopeful for myself being a patient, that AI will backstop some things, see a doctor, maybe what a doctor couldn't see in the chart, will say, hey, here's some advice, maybe you want to, look for sepsis, which will see these advancements to help the docs do things in very small but meaningful ways in the next 3 to 5 years. And then 10 years from now that we actually have a healthier population of people, those types of things around preventative care. And that's where I think AI for good and a major part of something that we have to solve around healthcare within the U.S., in the developing, and then also in the developing and emerging countries too.
Picking up on the healthcare, I'm hopeful from a mental health standpoint. We're all in a better place. Yeah. Because to your point around task lists, and it's just everybody's tired and exhausted, and the things that make us human and create meaning and value and enjoyment in life feels like there's no time for. And so my hope and belief is that we're going to spend more time as a society. When you think about going to work, people care about the experience. You're going to be able to have the experiences you want at home because you're not focused on getting all those tasks done. I think we can control that. I mean, all these kind of negative things we've talked about, AI is what we decide it's going to be, and I'm really hopeful we decide all of this overwhelming stuff we're trying to get done and it's soul-sucking. There it is. We're going to stop doing that so we can focus on the things we want to focus on.
Yeah, I'm going to be an optimistic too. Again, I do believe that the tech itself is neutral and it could go one way or another. So really, I find that question asking, what are we as humans going to do with this? I'm optimistic there too. I think we're a pretty darn awesome bunch. Sometimes we need a bit of a kick in the
pants.
Yeah, whatever. I'm going to say it in French in order to get moving. I think this AI might provide that, right? But I think we come together and we will see some really beautiful stories around the AI in the same way we saw them with the internet. It's not all being positive. If you think back at the impact the internet has had, but there are so many beautiful stories around it. And my favorite one might be around education, and it might be around how the internet has helped some developing countries leapfrog their education gap by giving access, to some of the best classes in the world are up there, and just willing students or can access them, and they couldn't before. It's not perfect, there are a bunch of issues there, and it's up to us as a society to try to solve that, but I think we come together and we do it when it matters. And I think AI is going to be the same. It's going to offer some amazing opportunities to develop things that will make the world better and our lives better, and it's going to offer opportunities to do the opposite. I think we choose the good one more often than the bad one, and end up in a much better place.
Great. So we would like to open this up to those who have questions. We can always continue on in any other topic here that you want, but certainly we'll start here, and then over there as the first three. So if you'd like to shout it out, I'll repeat it here for the record. Okay, we have a mic.
Apologies for anyone who was in the same session with me this morning. My questions tend to be a little long. But I took 3 pages of notes while we were talking. Okay, so in thinking about how to use AI in the workplace, and specifically in my workplace, I work in HR and recruiting and talent development. I can definitely see the benefits as this could relate to interviewing candidates, especially related to bias and also fulfilling our requirements for EEO and OFCCP compliance. So one of those things that's tough to ask of an organization is to supply their interview notes and rationale for choosing a certain candidate over another. And in a big global company like mine, that you have a lot of back-end data that shows the disparity between hiring choices. So sometimes inadvertently we hire white men over Indian women. So I'm thinking that there could be an opportunity in utilizing AI during the interview and interview documentation process to not only gain those insights to which questions are causing a disparity, but also to ease the documentation process. So curious if you have any experience in utilizing AI or implementing AI for meeting documentation, interviewing documentation, and second to that, just curious, is it easier to implement AI in voice to text or picture to text, like checks and coupons and stuff like that? Because I could see it going
Want to
either
start?
way.
I can, oh my God.
My question's
No,
are
that's
long.
great.
No, I love it because now I'm going to nerd out. So that's a very interesting question, very cutting edge. What is better? It's hard to say. Images, vision, right now with the technology called deep learning is going and is making leaps and strides really fast. So we're gotten really good at identifying objects and images, even pinpointing exactly which pixels are part of these objects. This is actually a technology that is enabling self-driving cars today. If you look at what's coming out of the computer in self-driving car, you've got this image of what the car sees, and all the pixels have different colors based on whether it's a tree or a pedestrian or the sidewalk or things like that. So we're really good at images. And natural language, we're getting there. It's a bit behind, but we're getting there. There is voice, there is speech to text specifically that has like years of work and is being kind of shifting right now to the new technologies. But in understanding natural language, which is it's a different task, right? Speech to text is about understanding what we say and converting it into text. Natural language understanding is about taking an entire document and figuring out what is this document about. And one classic task in natural language understanding is what's called text summarization. Taking a large corpus of text and outputting one paragraph that summarizes it. Right? And actually, we just published a paper, I think a month ago, that does that on scientific text, right? It takes a scientific text and it outputs the abstract that you see at the top of a scientific paper. And I like to point out the funny thing about this paper is that when you start reading it, you start by the abstract, and the last line of the abstract is, this abstract was automatically generated by the paper. So it's cool. Anyway, but we're getting there. I think this is going to be the next big thing. Yeah.
Hour-long interview condensed.
That's exactly it, right? I'm still hoping, wishing for the day where this thing is going to take all the emails I get in a day and summarize it.
To go straight into my ATS or show my results and then, just totally automate the whole process.
Yeah, one thing that hasn't really come up in the conversation yet is because we deal with HR bots and chatbots, and chatbots haven't really come up a whole lot, but there's the notion, and it's been alluded to, the idea that we as humans, when we're talking with other humans, and especially around the empathetic side of things, we want to kind of talk about what's on our minds right now, like what we're thinking right now. And when you're being told, go to this obscure intranet site, find this form, fill out this form, now go to a totally different system, try to find this other form, fill out that form. That's not how we as humans talk with each other. And so when we talk about AI possibly even being empathetic, it's also about the AI being able to converse with you, to actually have a conversation back and forth. And that's the world of chatbots, to be able to say, for the chatbot to be able to say to the interviewer, what did you think about this person? And they could just say a bunch of things, and it can, as Philip said, it can parse the things that they're saying, use each of the pieces of what they're saying to then continue to follow up. Oh, you said you did this. And then prompt questions that are not a static form, because the interview wasn't a static process. It evolved, it changed, it was conversational. And so if we can make artificial intelligence conform more to the way that we talk, to reduce the
we don't
UI.
talk like robots.
Yeah. And we don't encounter UIs in life. Like UI is this weird artificial construct that we've had to be forced to be robots. But now, if the robots can become us in a way that we naturally converse with each other, still extract the information from the interviewer through a chat conversation with them, summarize really quickly, then that I see as a big future of how we interact with technology to reduce all of the what blue button, what's this icon? As we've talked about hieroglyphics, like oftentimes our interfaces are just a bunch of hieroglyphics that we have to decipher because we have no idea what that button symbol is.
Right, and conversational AI is actually starting in the automotive industry. You think about the connected car, and you've got a driver and a passenger, and you're trying to figure out what parking garage to go to. You see it in the top major German brands today about this connected car, this conversational AI, and I do believe that will manifest itself in law enforcement. We talked about it before, the interview between a suspect and a detective, the interaction between a patient and a doctor. You think about that interaction and that conversation to do that documentation. And I think to your case, too, the interview, and then you can parse out the really most important pieces as, again, the humans making the right decision about who to hire,
It could work for meetings, too.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Maybe people it,
Right.
so no one's going to a different form, going back into HS, getting another email. It's just...
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that's the key when we think about some of our day-to-day work processes, is we may want to think about just rethink the process altogether rather than trying to automate our existing, which is where we go with experience design. It's sort of like, what do we want the experience of an interviewer and an interviewee to be? And then what is the information we need? And it maybe doesn't need to look the same way it does today.
We want them to be hands-free and conversate. So how can we use AI to...
Yeah.
We have the next question right over here.
Thank you guys, first of all. I want this to come from hopefully not a disparaging or hopeless place, but I teach emotional intelligence to engineers. Actually, yesterday mentioned that the perspective taking of college students is on the decline. I happen to see empathetic scores to be quite low among the upcoming engineers who are the next potential creators of the AI, and I'm sort of curious, what can we glean from that? How does that all come into play? And then my sort of maybe piggybacking on that is that there are kids of a technological era who aren't used to connecting with each other. How do they feel a prioritization towards an empathetic experience in general?
So it's interesting, we were talking about this earlier today, as a society we've gotten away from empathy, we spend less time on it, we're just not as, and technology has kind of taken us there, and I think we've kind of been on this cusp of not taking it all the way to empathy, just like, hey, technology, and we talked about the fact, now is the time to use AI to, one, in the things we do, make sure it's built in, and two, free up so people have the time to actually start doing it again. Because I did not grow up with as much technology as kids today. I consider myself a pretty empathetic person. I am so much less empathetic than I used to be. And so I can't blame kids today, because it's like, who's giving them the time? Who's teaching them? And so we've got to just take it's there. And we've also talked, in my point around mental health, why is it on the decline? We're humans, we actually crave this stuff. We may not be good at it, we may not be taking the time to do it, but I think it is that connection that, hey, someone took the time to try and understand me, try and walk in my shoes, like they actually care. That's what really impacts mental health, is just that connection to other people and not feeling alone.
And disconnected.
Yeah.
It's the disconnection.
It's
and
huge.
It takes focused and deliberate practice. And so we can get some of this crazy tasks off of our lives each and every day, and then focus on the practice of connections. I think that'll also help with just the society problem that we have in this polarization. You know, we hide behind technology so we can be very polarized, but connections are going to help you, Philip, to your point before, around finding middle ground.
Yeah. So you teach emotional intelligence to engineers? First of all, you might be the one doing the most important job here. I really want to see your curriculum. I want this to become standard practice. I want this to be taught in every engineering school. This is incredibly important, because I do believe one of the reasons we're building these very unempathetic systems is partly because they're built by engineers. Traditionally, engineers have focused a lot more on solutions, understanding the basic principles, and the world works in a certain way. It's very far from what you need in order to develop acute emotional intelligence, right? So it's always been traditionally true. But I think, as to your point, I'm not surprised that it's worse today, right? That's what you're saying. I think the technology we're using is kind of spiraling us towards less and less, and especially for the people who actually like technology. Why do they like technology? Because, well, it's isolating me more. So, hey, I like technology, I'm going in engineering. It's like we have this cycle that we need to break. And actually, I do think that we need to start there. We need to teach more emotional intelligence, so that the next designer of the next Facebook algorithm doesn't base all of the result they give on likes and scrolls and basic behavioral traits that the users have when they use the app. And we have to think deeper to build more complex models of their mind and who they are. And this requires that the people building these systems have empathy, have an emotional intelligence. So I think what you're doing is super important. I really want to find ways, I really hope we find ways for this to become standard practice.
I mean, one of the things when we're doing transformations, kind of coming up with solutions with clients, we'll do this kind of persona empathy mapping exercise, and some of the clients are like, we've all worked together 20 years, we don't need to do this. I'm like, just humor me. And we'll, there's people in different roles who've been working together for 20 years. I'm like, when you're doing this work, just fill out your empathy map. And we'd have a few of them get together, and all these different roles that are a part of the process. And we ask them, like, what are you feeling, hearing, saying, doing? But that feeling, like, how often do you actually talk about how you're feeling about your work at work? So we have them completed. It's really cathartic. And then we have them share it with one another. And every single time they're like, I had no idea that that's what was going on with you. Like, why that was such a challenge. Or man, I didn't know you felt the same way. And you just think about, it was an hour to 2 hours. They will forever work differently by having that one experience. And then they come up with all sorts of solutions to solve their problems together. But if they just came in and were tactically like, okay, we'll fix this, we'll change this process, we need some technology here, you never got that empathy, which was what really mattered the most and created a better solution.
You're doing really important work.
I think we have
over there.
Yeah, no, in the black shirt, right there. You.
No.
I think he was next, and then over here.
We've had a lot of questions from women, which is a very interesting bias.
Hi, I wanted to know your opinion on some comments that I heard from an interview a couple of months ago from Elon Musk, where he was talking about AI. He felt like really optimistic about the impact AI was going to have in healthcare and education in the next 10, 30, and 50 years. But he was like extremely pessimistic on the data governance and security part of AI. He said, and these are his words, that AI is growing so exponentially that now it's too late for us to create a really strong framework in order to really know that there are public policies that could regulate all these advancements. He said that the best time to do it was 10 years ago, but now it is growing so fast that unfortunately we will never catch up to the advancements and to creating a really strong framework to guarantee that all these efforts toward privacy, security, and the moral side of everything is going in the right direction. So I don't know what's your opinion about it.
I think I agree with you. We're at a crossroads with this. It's gone around AI. However, I think what has happened is made the news on the negative side of AI and data breaches and all of that is causing us as a society to think about this very differently. And it'll take us to act as industry leaders, whether you're what I always call the horizontals, Google, Facebook, Amazon, and what they start to do as industry leaders around privacy, the privacy of your data. Look at what Amazon's done in the past, 2 weeks around rolling out about privacy and security around Alexa. Look at the role Apple is taking now. I don't know how many of you have taken the 13 iOS update, but they're telling you when your data is being used. It comes down to you start changing governance and a different trajectory when you first have awareness. And I think that's where we are now, and I'm really proud to see the horizontals start to take this stand around this. And again, the thought leadership that's happening in Europe, through the governments, through the EU, around rights to be forgotten and who owns that data, and taking this very strong stand. Again, I think it's from our US government needs to do the same exact thing. But industry is starting to stand up to your point that we don't want it to be too late. We don't want that trajectory that is happening because of all this collection of data, and the data quality's gotten better. But 3 very big industry leaders around AI are making very different decisions. And then it's up to us also as, in society to help them to continue to be aware and, force that type of change. But I think we're at a crossroads, but I think we're going to the right way, at least those 3 examples in the past month of things that are happening. I mean, even Instagram, again, to your point, Phil, about some of the bullying that's happening, like, starting to make different decisions to start changing the trajectory of what could be a very negative impact on our society.
And one thing that we do need people to have their voice heard. This is happening. Businesses are adopting this all over the place. And it has to be the people, Apple or others are going to feel the pressure from their customers who want access or want things to change, or the government is going to be it's a much slower process for the government to be able to make these decisions. And I think that it's definitely the populace that needs it, but also we need more tools for the populace to be able to access this. And there are great business opportunities for people to be able to create those tools to access my data, my records, my healthcare records, or my financial records, especially. To be able to kind of demand the access to that, and also be able to have access to AI. It's something that it's kind of held up, and it goes a little bit to the engineers. The engineers right now have the access and have the governance, but if the populace has the ability to access it, and I think of eBay a little bit. eBay's big story was while we think about like, oh, it's a big garage sale, right? You just kind of think, I need to get rid of stuff in my house, and that's it. But I worked with eBay for a bit, and what motivated them was the fact that there was a guy in Africa who was able to sell his drums to the rest of the world because of the eBay platform. And that transformed his entire accessibility to the technology and to data. An archaic system of distribution across the world was broken by one enterprising company that was able to allow the populace to be able to have access to this distribution network. And I think we need more and more of that, and it comes from demand of the populace too, and a business opportunity.
That's a great question.
You got a question here? I think next, and then over here. Or either way.
I'm trying to formulate the question. I work with people as a coach, and the very basic level in terms of empathy is teaching them how to read body language. And I think about how AI and empathy connect with teaching something, robots. I think of that female robot that's out just lately, that they're teaching how to interact with people. How important it is to read body language in terms of getting to empathy and where we're going with that in AI.
Does anybody have a thought on algorithms that are looking at, are being able to parse the sentiment of people and also to be able to respond back and forth to people's emotional state?
I mean, yeah, this. Well, you're hitting at a difficult question for AI. I don't think, like, the way I like to talk about it is to say, in order for a system, an AI system, to be able to build something that looks like empathy, they need to form a model of the human mind. And this is a very complex thing to ask of a computer system or an AI, right? Because, in order to connect to someone, I have to try to figure out what are they thinking about, how are they feeling, and it depends on a bunch of things. You know, for sure I can read it in your face, I can read it in your tone of voice, or even in an email I can read something, but I can also understand it through our continuous interactions, the fact that we've been talking and we're friends and we've known each other for a long time. But to begin all of that, I need to understand that the human mind is a very, very complex thing. And in order for a mathematics system to be able to do the same, they should be able to have a similar model. Up until now, I can tell you, no researcher, nobody's looking at that. This is not even on the radar of people. I think this should be a research topic. This should be an active research topic. I think right now, the models we build of humans, again, are the sum total of the interactions they've had with the system, their behaviors. But we're not trying to understand if these behaviors are automatic, reflex behaviors, or if they're rooted in the deep aspirational selves of the people that are doing it. It's really tricky, even for a human to do that, so machines cannot do this yet. So when we talk about reaching the point where AI, you know, what
we're talking about, and there were a lot of ethical issues around, and the biggest thing was empathy. What it looked like and what it meant was very different to different people, and so trying to create one standard of how people should be doing it kind of put that effort.
Well, empathy isn't binary, and AI still is binary, and I think that's one of the pieces that will have to be.
Yeah. There we go.
I tried to use the little chip in my head to move them, but I guess it's not advanced enough, so I have to move that in the way. So I'm going to first of all, I think it's time for lecturing him. I really think that artificial intelligence is not an adequate name. And I hope, I have some ideas in mind, but I'll get the domains first, and you guys can work on it too. but I really think there's something that needs to be done about that. I have the advantage of being raised with a geologist father who's a three-dimensional thinker, tactile, who, rest his soul, left the world before a lot of visualization was used in geology to teach geology instead of going into the mines and living out the full 360-degree experience of getting a base of knowledge. And what I'm noticing is that when you talk, I get concerned about things like text summary, I get the efficiencies, I get concerned about the things that do things that create what I would consider adaptive development. And I feel like there's a morality there. And I feel like it's not being discussed. And I feel like it has to do with what are we as human beings in some kind of, gestalt of a manner that we aren't even aware of, and we're becoming surface dwellers almost when we're on quests for self-exploration and quantitative leaps and perception. And I'm really concerned that artificial intelligence, as it's being valued this day and age, is not developmentally enlightened. And I love the efficiencies, and I love tech, and so it's not a condemnation. But I feel like we're not discussing some of these subtleties. I don't know if there's a replacement for having 20 books spread out all around you and coming into it. And then lastly, more and more I see research coming out in two areas that are of great concern. Number one, the loss when you have young children looking at a two-dimensional monitor and seeing a horizon on the two-dimensional monitor, which is artificial 3D. They're not getting the physical, optical, neurological development. And secondly, you're seeing studies come out where medical schools are having trouble training surgeons because they don't have the motor skills and the connected problem solving to go in and do the intricate adaptations. This is aside from the great robotics surgery I'm talking about things. So I really wonder if there's this whole field of what are we? Because what are we? What is our potential? What are we possibly missing because we value a certain efficiency, a certain order of things, a certain sense of data management? I think there's some very serious questions because just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. This is something that I just don't feel is said in enough arenas. And by the way, humanities and engineering has been something that is worldwide and has come in after the last decades. And I think it's extremely exciting because it has to do with self-reflection. It has to do with contextualizing people in the enjoyment of understanding the impact sociologically of the problems that they solve as engineers. And even if you have a vast array of introverts, it's an extraordinarily easy to light up process when you create that sense of empathy into humanity from the task that is your most satisfying. So I want to throw those out as thoughts for you to connect any way you want. And within those are just some very sincere concerns. I frankly don't know exactly where to go with in my own life.
Yeah, and we have pretty much that'll be the last question because we have basically a couple minutes left. But I think in general, how do we make artificial intelligence more intelligent?
Well, I think first of all, I think she gave us the next topic for another panel of another day, so thank you for that. I think you've made some really very important points. I think to the first point is not calling it artificial intelligence, what is it to start changing paradigm? I think we have to think about it being augmented intelligence to the human. To your point, first of all, about education to the surgeon, to the clinician, to the specialist of that. How do you use augmented intelligence to help them practice better? So when they get into the real practice of medicine, you give them those cases in I think a more safe environment. And we're starting to see the medical schools start to do that, specifically in where my domain is in radiology, about putting test cases in there where I said, look, there's a suspicious finding. Are you finding a suspicious finding? In surgery, on cadavers, to be able to help educate in that way. I think that's really important. Different ways about, again, of a different perspective of augmenting intelligence versus this artificial about efficiencies and replacement. I think that's it, but this is in its infancy of how to think about this differently. And I agree with you, we're not using the right language around this to change the discussion.
Yeah, and I would just kind of end on the note that morality is coming from us, and so it has to be, as you've said, the technology is technology. It's going to reflect what we put into it, and we have to be able to make a decision to be able to push it toward a more intelligent and more moral solution.
Yeah, very briefly, I hear your anxiety, and I think it's rooted in something that we have a tendency to get into as humans when we discover something that changes a lot of things very quickly, which is what the latest progress in artificial intelligence has been. We get into this excited techno-solutionism model where we believe that what we have are solutions to our deepest problems, a magic pill that's going to do it. And we do hear a lot of that techno-solutionism around discourse around AI, saying, well, now problems are fixed, AI is coming, it's going to summarize my emails, and suddenly, well, what we have to keep in mind is none of these solutions are perfect. None of these solutions are, my text summary is, well, it's a text summary, but does it capture everything? Is it biased? How do I assess that? Is it better than if I had a human do it? Like, would I want to have a human do it? I don't know. And we have to ask these questions. We have to go deeper than just the headlines that we see when one of these solutions come up. We have to question Elon Musk when he goes out and says this is going to solve everything, because it's not. It's going to be part of the solution. It's a new Lego piece that we have to try to work together and solve. Let's not believe that we have the magic pills. We don't. We have some components that might help us, and I think we shouldn't refrain from using them.
And with that said, I think I'd like to thank you all for joining us. And thank each of our panelists here for great words of wisdom. So, thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Let's give one more hand for Michelle, Karen, Philippe, and Lance. They'd love to meet you out here. Thank you for Liberty Global for sponsoring this awesome clinical workshop. We hope to see you guys all at some more of our events with Richard Branson tonight. If you guys don't have tickets, get tickets, the Old Theater. And Cosmic America Saturday. Come party with us in Gregoire at Civic Center Park. All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
Shake your hand.
Thanks, guys. Fist bump. It was awesome. Great. Thanks. Thanks for the applause. Did you come to the last side? Yeah. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Very nice meeting you. Moderated it really well. A lot of
Very nice meeting you.
Sorry to interrupt. No. Today, yeah.